Hello everybody, this is Secular Sekai with Tridents Against Tyrants, coming to you with a video on the topic of the Republic of Georgia, also known as Sakartvelo. Apologies for posting this on, I guess what for Canadians and Americans would be Thanksgiving. It's been a very busy week. I wanted to get this up earlier, but I'm sure all of you know how those weeks go sometimes. But the reason I wanted to go over this topic is because I feel it's one that isn't covered very much in Western media. I feel like there are many Canadians and Americans, possibly even Europeans, although they'd be more likely to be aware of the fact that there is a country called the Republic of Georgia, which is very different from the U.S. state of Georgia. If anyone happens to be an American, you probably noticed that this red and white flag is not the flag of the U.S. state of Georgia, or at least I hope that you do. And yeah, so basically this is a country that some would argue it's more indirect, and some would argue it is direct, or has the potential to be very direct in terms of having relation to the current ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The primary focus of this channel is always going to be Ukraine, but I wanted to cover this a bit just so people are aware of it. This stream this weekend will be focused entirely on the front lines, and yeah, as I think I've said this before, I want this channel to be focused primarily on Ukraine, but I also want to try to take a big picture approach, looking at all of the countries, organizations, politics globally that have a direct or indirect effect on the conflict in Ukraine and general Ukrainian prosperity moving into the future. Alright, so let's move over to the map. Alright, here we go. And so, here, again, we have the deep state map, and you can see here is Ukraine. And you'll notice, I've mentioned this in the previous video, that aside from the front lines, where combat is active in Ukraine, we also have these other areas in surrounding countries that also are highlighted due to ongoing, typically frozen conflicts with the Russian Federation, also known as Orkland. And let's go ahead and take a closer look right now. Alright, so moving over here, this area right here, this is the nation of Georgia. Capital being Tbilisi, which, there it is. I mean, it's a little small there in the center, but you can see Tbilisi. And then these two areas over here that you can see highlighted, not this one on the right that says Chechnya, but these two smaller areas are Abkhazia on the left and South Ossetia on the right. Now, what makes these significant is that anyone who has followed and been aware of Eastern European conflicts and politics since the 1990s is probably aware of this, but I'm sure many people have not followed that. Just like Ukraine, Georgia, post breakup of the Soviet Union, declared its independence, became its own sovereign country, but in the aftermath of doing so, experienced quite a bit of internal friction, displacement, and conflict over exactly how that national sovereignty should be expressed. And so the end result was basically two regions of the country, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, Here we see it as Shkimvali district. But yes, this is South Ossetia, and both are currently occupied by Russian troops. There are Russian troops there. They are breakaway states only recognized by Russia, not by the international community, similar to the LPR and DPR situation when Ukraine was invaded. Very similar story of little green men coming and basically, quote unquote, assisting the local separatist forces. And so, ever since 2008, both of these regions have been occupied and had the presence of Russian troops within their borders, much to the chagrin of the internationally recognized Georgian government. And there are some complexities. I won't say that everything is perfect with the Georgian government, but we will get to that in just a bit. To start with, now that you at least know where Republic of Georgia is on the map, let's move over and we'll give a little bit of context with some recent events. So, alright. The ruling party of the Republic of Georgia at the moment is the Georgian Dream Party, which has had quite a bit of friction with the EU and Western Europe as a whole, due to being perceived as partially pro-European, but also quite conciliatory toward Russia. Some say this is because the leadership of the party is itself pro-Russian and trying to remain as neutral as possible while preparing basically to align with the Russian Federation in the long term. And others would say it's simply because they're aware of the fact that they are small and vulnerable and could very easily be attacked by Russia again. And when I say again, that is because, again, you're going to have deja vu. Very similarly to the situation in Ukraine, at the outset of independence, shortly thereafter, there was basically what was known, not this war, but rather, let me just get this pulled up for you right quick. Here we go. The Georgian Civil War, lasting from 1991 to 1993, and technically encompassing two other conflicts within it as well. The Georgian Civil War basically consisted of armed conflict between the Georgian government, separatists in Abkhazia, separatists in South Ossetia, and then internal conflict within the greater Georgian government itself, due to a coup d'etat occurring, which overthrew the first elected president, Zviad Gamsakhurdia, whose name I'm sure I'm probably butchering. If anyone who's watching this is Georgian, I apologize. I still need to work on that language, which I actually do find the Georgian language quite beautiful. It sounds and looks very unique. In any case, moving on. The end result, basically, to summarize it, was that conflict emerged. The government was overthrown. The previous president, Zviad Gamsakhurdia, he attempted to regain power and failed. His attempt to retake power is seen in history as a rebellion because he was unable to retake power. And the result of the war in Abkhazia and the war of South Ossetia wound up being that both are de facto autonomous, claiming their own independence, and supported by the presence of Russian troops within their borders. Now, the follow-up to this, there's quite a bit of follow-up to this. And the reason that this affects Ukraine specifically is because you'll notice that here, Abkhazia is on the Black Sea. And you'll see the Russian Black Sea Fleet here on this image. Might be a little small, but this little red boat symbol right here is stationed in Abkhazia. Up until now, there's been limited direct interaction with the war in Ukraine from Abkhazia, to my understanding. But there's an expectation that that may change, and therefore that could create a situation where Abkhazia, the breakaway self-declared government and Russian troops stationed within those borders, could become a viable target for Ukrainian strikes, missile strikes, or other military operations to combat the Russian Black Sea Fleet. There's already a naval base in Abkhazia, but the biggest thing that's happened this year relating to this topic is the fact that Russia has announced that they will be opening up a brand new naval base in occupied Abkhazia. And I have an article pulled up. I'll be linking it in the description, but I'm not going to show it on screen just because, unlike Wikipedia, I don't know, I don't want any website to come to me and say, no, you can't utilize our article. Can't show it on screen. So basically, Russia will set up a naval base in the separatist Georgian region of Abkhazia, its leader has told Russian media. It comes as Ukraine increases its attacks on Russia's Black Sea Fleet. 2 weeks ago, Kiev struck the fleet's headquarters in Crimea. The Kremlin has refused to comment on the alleged deal. Georgia's foreign ministry said it would be a flagrant violation of Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. That is definitely an understatement. I mean, flagrant violations of said sovereignty and territorial integrity have been happening since the 1990s and most recently in 2008. Abkhazia, which already hosts a Russian military base, lies in the northwestern corner of Georgia and borders Russia. The region fought a war of secession with Georgia from 1992 to 93 and declared independence in 1999, but has little international recognition. And since the Georgian-Russian War of 2008, Moscow has recognized it as an independent state, while Georgia maintains that Abkhazia is occupied by Russia. The location of this new base would be in Ochamchire district, which is, if you can see my mouse, right here in this portion of Georgia. And it would boost the defense capacity of Russia and Abkhazia, claims Mr. Bazania, in association with the Russian government. So, yeah, basically, I won't go through the rest of this. You'll see that this is very bad news. This is bad news because this could basically create a situation where Russia's actions could pull other countries in the region into the conflict. Now, not the Georgian government itself, of course, because Abkhazia is a breakaway region that is currently occupied, but basically this is kind of like a step closer toward Russia more fully claiming that these quote-unquote breakaway states need protection of some sort and need to be pulled into the Russian Federation, as was claimed with the DPR and LPR during the current war in Ukraine. Now, in 2008, the Russo Georgian War, which happened just 6 years before the start of the war in Ukraine. Remember, the war started in 2014 after the Maidan Revolution. A lot of history there that I feel a lot of people aren't aware of because they just remember the headlines from 2022. It was a war between Russia alongside the Russian-backed self-proclaimed republics of South Ossetia and Abkhazia and the recognized government of the Republic of Georgia. The war took place in August following a diplomatic crisis between Russia and Georgia, both formerly constituent republics of the Soviet Union. The fighting took place in the strategically important South Caucasus region. It is regarded as the first European war of the 21st century. Now, basically, what this war accomplished for Russia was it gave them the ability to further bolster forces in Abkhazia and South Ossetia and increase their presence in the region. Similar to Ukraine with Luhansk and Donetsk. First, little green men, denying official involvement, giving supplies mostly to separatists who were doing a good portion of the fighting, and then slowly introducing their own troops and their own weapons. And I don't mean to imply that there were never any Russian troops there from the beginning. There definitely were. I maintain that there were from the very beginning of the I guess we'll say soft invasion of 2014, the initial wave. But of course, the large influx, the pouring of Russian troops into Ukrainian territory didn't happen until 2022. But anyway, that's digressing a little bit. Now, my point with all of this basically comes down to we see this pattern from the 1990s, from 2008, from 2014, and the rest of the world has just turned a blind eye. Similar things happen in other places, such as Moldova, Belarus, which is very pro-Russia as a whole. The government there at least is. Not the people. I won't speak for all the people. But this is something that is just common from the Russian handbook. And we saw one wave in the 1990s. We saw another wave in 2008. The Republic of Georgia, let me say this. Beyond just Ukraine, if I had to take an educated guess about the next country, realistically, that Russia would feel emboldened to invade, it would be Republic of Georgia. Because unfortunately, they are even more vulnerable than Ukraine was in 2014. And they have been for quite a long time. Now, this year, 2023, there were protests in Georgia over a bill that was proposed called the Law on Transparency of Foreign Influence. And there's quite a bit that goes into this, but basically to summarize, you'll see that the ruling party, the Georgian Dream Party that I mentioned before, who are considered by quite a few to be relatively pro-Russian, by others to be overly conciliatory out of fear, perhaps a combination of both. Here we have the protests against this law, which basically would, here we go. Under the bill, non-commercial legal entities, the most common form of an NGO or non-governmental organization in Georgia, broadcasters, legal entities that alone or jointly own a print media outlet operating in Georgia, and legal entities that own or use jointly with or with others an internet domain and or internet hosting intended for the dissemination of information through the internet in the Georgian language must register in public registry as agents of foreign influence and be subjected to the monitoring of the Ministry of Justice if they receive more than 20% of their annual income from a foreign power. And this was criticized by the United States and compared to similar bills that occurred in Hungary and the Russian Federation, their own foreign agent law equivalents. Civil society organizations also objected to this, and the response that came from the People's Power movement in association with Georgian Dream was that it was based on the American model, because the United States does have laws that also monitor and track organizations in case they come from a potential political adversary or foreign power that is deemed dangerous, such as a theocratic government or organization, or theocratic organization affiliated with a foreign government that is particularly authoritarian in its expression of religion, or from a communist nation, really from just like any country, based on an evaluation from the American perspective of an organization or country that is seen to be in conflict or at odds with American interests as a nation state. So basically, national security. And of course, this is a bit of this gets a little complicated, but not really. I mean, it comes down to, if you continue reading here on Wikipedia at least, the Georgian draft law was based on the U.S. law, but it was significantly softened to meet the standards of the European Court of Human Rights, adding that if the U.S. law was transferred to the European space, it would be in conflict with the European human rights standards. Critics said that the bill represented an authoritarian shift and could have hurt Georgia's hopes of European Union membership. So, basically, from what I have seen from looking into this bill a bit more, the biggest concern is that the way that it was written and is expressed, if someone were to dig into all the details of it, it seems more similar to Hungarian and Russian laws in how it would most likely be implemented, rather than existing American models or European Union models of foreign agent laws that are seen as being, in certain aspects, less authoritarian or less likely to result in censorship of opposing viewpoints to the point of creating a de facto one-party state. That's really what this comes down to, because anyone who is aware of Canadian or American or, for the most part, generally most European countries within the EU, how their equivalent laws work. I mean, you do see different radio talk shows, you see different news agencies and sources that support and oppose the existing governments, and that even seem very sympathetic or conciliatory toward groups that exist outside of those countries. In places like, if you look at certain news outlets in the US, you'll see plenty that are pro-Ukraine and pro-European Union and pro-liberalism or democracy. I won't say liberalism, but let's just say democracy. But if you look, you'll also find plenty of well-known outlets that maybe aren't outright supportive, but at least don't take great efforts not to discuss or not to say anything negative about Russia or Putin, or who make very positive remarks about individuals who are generally seen as rather authoritarian, such as Viktor Orban from Hungary. You find both sides in societies like that. You don't find that really much at all in Russia, and you don't find that quite as much in certain other places like Hungary, which is odd to say because Hungary is an EU nation. I think I've brought up Hungary more than once in previous videos, streams, but it is a good example. We'll come back to them another day. But basically, just to get back on topic, this is all expressions of the Russian formula for taking over a country, completely and totally, however they can. And this is something that could pull Georgia into the current war with Ukraine. This is something, let me go ahead and switch back to the map. This is something that could definitely further destabilize the region. And yeah, the one thing to keep in mind is the fact that Ukraine does not have an active navy for being able to invade or occupy a place like Abkhazia. Not saying that Ukraine would, but let's say that if this happens and it becomes a legitimate military target because Russia is attacking Ukrainian ships or sending supplies to Crimea from Abkhazia, you know, there's not really a way to stage an intervention of that beyond missile strikes. And it is quite a bit further away, as you can see, from Crimea than, striking that far of a distance away from the mainland of Ukraine, what's currently controlled in Kherson, that would be pretty difficult. I don't know if Ukraine has those kinds of missile capabilities at the moment, and if those strikes could happen fast enough to not be intercepted. If there were a presence in Crimea, then probably, but that is a long ways away. So all of this basically just to give you an introduction to this country, and this is a very terse introduction. I could go on for a long time. Creating a good summary of the entire situation is difficult because there's so much history, but now you kind of have a basic introduction to the Republic of Georgia, how it relates to Ukraine, and more specifically the fact that there have been major protests. There have been multiple armed conflicts leading up to the war in Ukraine. Some would even argue that the multiple wars in Republic of Georgia were kind of a rehearsal before the invasion of the Donbass, Luhansk and Donetsk. If we don't pay attention to things like this, if we don't see this pattern and we just put our foot down and say, this is going to stop now, it'll keep happening. If Republic of Georgia was a rehearsal for Ukraine and Russia is allowed to get away with its crimes and allowed to, whenever this war is over, rebuild strength and get more weapons together and really reintegrate to a certain degree with the international community and the economies of North America, Western Europe, Australia, South America, just Africa, Asia, just all of the rest of the world, then this will happen again. And what will Ukraine end up being the rehearsal for tomorrow? What's bigger than Ukraine? And I think all of you know what the answer to that might be. And none of us want to see that war occur. Anyway, just some thoughts on the matter. I hope this has been informative. I will be attempting to put together some better video editing and some scripts for future videos. But I just wanted to leave you with this. And yeah, we will be discussing more in depth the situation on the ground in Ukraine this weekend during the live stream. All right, thank you for tuning in. All of you have a great day, and Slava Ukraini.